John 6:4. Erat autem proximum Pascha, dies festus Judaeorum. And Passover was very near, a celebratory or solemn day of the Jews. There's a few interesting things to talk about here. Let's start in an unorthodox way a little further down in the verse with dies. You may know, if you've seen a lot of Latin over the years, if you've read a lot of Latin in different contexts and in prose and in verse, that dies, although it's generally masculine, is not always masculine. Sometimes it can be feminine. Here we know it's masculine because of festus, which agrees with it in number, case, and gender. And of course, this is a masculine ending of the second declension. But sometimes you do see it in its feminine form, particularly in poetry, often for the sake of the meter, but perhaps sometimes for mellifluous reasons, that is to do with the sound of the poetry at a particular place. Rarely in prose it may occur as a feminine noun, but generally you see it as a noun of the masculine gender, as it is here. But that's worth knowing. It's worth knowing that sometimes it can switch in certain circumstances, particularly if you're reading Ovid's Metamorphoses or something, and I hope that's how you spend your spare time these days. You might encounter it as a feminine noun and say, well, wait a minute, Flatt just told me on the Daily Dose of Latin that it's a masculine noun. What is this preposterous tomfoolery? I want to spare you that disconcerting experience. So I'm letting you know now, sometimes it's masculine, sometimes it's feminine, but generally you can count on it being masculine. So that's the first thing to talk about. Gender also, grammatical gender that is related to the other interesting word in this sentence, Pascha, or Pascha. I'm not sure. I'm just going to come out and be honest here. I'm not sure how it's supposed to sound in the Hebrew original. You'll have to ask Dr. Howell about that. My Hebrew skills are pretty terrible, but I think that's probably how a Latin speaker maybe would have said it. I don't know. Pascha and proximum go together here, and that's not obvious. If you look it up in a dictionary, you'll find out that Pascha usually is a feminine noun of the first declension, like rosa, just like those nouns you learned in your first week of Latin class. But sometimes, instead, it's a neuter noun, and instead of ending, let's say, in the genitive singular with ae, as you'd expect with a first declension feminine noun, you find it ending with a third declension ending, paschatis. So I'm not learned enough to comment on the relative frequency of those forms. I suspect from what I've read that the first declension form of the word is more common, and it's a little bit easier to deal with, but the other form, the neuter form, occurs in Jerome and in some other interesting places among the church fathers. So this is something that we need to know, particularly because in this sentence, it helps us understand what's going on with proximum. Otherwise, we'd have to say, why do we have what seems to be a neuter ending here? We could guess that this is being used in some sort of adverbial way, and that's possible, but I'm a fan of Occam's razor when it comes to grammar in general, which is if we can explain everything that we see with a very simple explanation that's not particularly far-fetched, then we should do that. And so I'm inclined to see this as the neuter form of this word pascha, here being modified, as we would expect in that case, by proximum. In a predicate sense, I should say. So the Pascha erat proximum. The Passover was very close. It was very near. In other words, it was about to happen. And then we've got to imagine sort of some punctuation for our English brains here, explaining in an apposite kind of way, dies festus Judaeorum. This is the evangelist explaining to us what the Passover is in case we weren't familiar. It's a festal day. We still use that adjective, by the way, in English from time to time, festal, usually just sort of in the context of Christmas songs and that sort of thing. But of course, this is the word that it comes from. We could say a solemn day of celebration, a festival, a day of religious observance. There's lots of different ways we could translate this as we want. But that should solve most of the mysteries of the passage for you.